I haven't spoken to anyone in 3 years, 80-year-old woman told Hell's Angel at gas station. The sun hung low over the desolate stretch of Route 66, casting long amber shadows across the cracked asphalt. It was that specific time of day when the heat begins to break, leaving behind a heavy stillness that feels almost sacred. At mile marker 42, a lone gas station stood like a relic from a bygone era, its neon sign flickering with a dying buzz: eat, sleep, fuel. Inside his rusted sedan, Elias Thorne, an 80-year-old woman with hands mapped by decades of hard work and eyes clouded by unshed tears, sat paralyzed. The engine was off. The keys were in her lap. She hadn't driven this far in months, let alone spoken to another human soul. 3 years. That was the number that haunted her quiet house, echoing in the empty hallways where the clock ticked too loudly. Since her husband, Arthur, passed and her only daughter moved overseas, Elias had retreated into a shell of silence so thick it felt physical. She spoke to her plants, she spoke to the television, but she hadn't spoken to anyone. Not a word, not a greeting, not a complaint. Just 3 years of absolute, suffocating isolation. Her stomach growled, a sharp reminder of her mortality, forcing her to make a choice. She needed gas, and perhaps, if she was brave enough, a bottle of water. Taking a shaky breath, she stepped out of the car. Her knees popped, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. As she walked toward the pumps, the ground began to vibrate. A low rumble grew into a roar, shaking the loose gravel under her feet. Around the bend came a procession of steel and chrome, motorcycles, dozens of them. Leading the pack was a massive bike, ridden by a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and leather. He wore a vest adorned with patches, the most prominent being the winged skull of the Hell's Angels. His beard was a thick cascade of gray and black, and his arms were a tapestry of ink telling stories of a life lived on the edge. Elias froze. Instinctively, she wanted to run back to her car, to lock the doors and hide. Society had taught her to fear men like this, men with rough faces, loud machines, and reputations that preceded them. But her legs felt like lead. She stood rooted to the spot as the bikers pulled in, filling the small lot with the smell of exhaust and gasoline. The leader, a man named Bear, killed his engine and swung a heavy leg over the seat. He removed his helmet, revealing a face that was stern but not unkind. He noticed Elias immediately. Most people would have looked away, pretending not to see the trembling old woman, but Bear locked eyes with her. He walked over, his boots crunching rhythmically on the pavement. The other bikers stayed back, giving their president space, watching with curious eyes. "Evening, ma'am," Bear said. His voice was surprisingly soft, a deep baritone that rumbled like distant thunder but lacked any aggression. "You look like you've seen a ghost. You all right?" Elias opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her throat felt sealed shut, the muscles atrophied from disuse. Tears welled up in her wrinkled cheeks. She tried to speak again, to say, "I'm fine," or "just getting gas," but the blockage was total. She shook her head, clutching her purse to her chest as if it were a shield. Bear stopped a few feet away. He didn't crowd her. He simply waited, his posture relaxed, hands visible at his sides. He sensed something profound breaking beneath the surface of her silence. "Take your time," he said gently. "Ain't going nowhere." The kindness in his voice, coming from a man who looked like a warrior, cracked the dam. Elias took a ragged breath, her shoulders heaving. She looked up at him, her gaze piercing through the leather and the tattoos to find the humanity underneath. She started, her voice a rusty croak, barely audible over the idling engines of the other bikes. She cleared her throat, wincing at the pain of using vocal cords that hadn't vibrated with speech in so long. "I haven't—" She paused, gathering strength. "I haven't spoken to anyone in 3 years." The words hung in the air, heavy and heartbreaking. The wind seemed to stop blowing. Even the flies buzzing around the trash cans seemed to pause. Bear's expression shifted.
The hardness in his eyes melted into a profound sadness. He didn't offer a platitude. He didn't tell her it would be okay or ask why. Instead, he slowly reached into his pocket, pulled out a clean handkerchief, and held it out to her. Then, to everyone's surprise, including his own crew, the towering biker sank down onto one knee. He brought himself to her eye level, removing the intimidation of his height. "Well," Bear said, his voice thick with emotion, "then I reckon it's an honor to be the first. My name is Bear, and I am listening, ma'am. Whatever you need to say, however long it takes, we ain't going anywhere." That simple act of kneeling, of lowering himself to meet her in her vulnerability, broke something inside Elias. She wasn't just an invisible old woman anymore. She was seen. She was heard before she even finished her sentence. She began to talk. At first, the words tumbled out in a chaotic rush, disjointed and tear-soaked. She talked about Arthur and how much she missed his laugh. She talked about the silence of the house and the way the dust motes danced in the sunlight, mocking her loneliness. She talked about the fear of being forgotten, of fading away without a trace. As she spoke, the years of pent-up grief poured out of her like a flood. Bear never interrupted. He just nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. Occasionally, he would wipe his own cheek, unable to hold back his own empathy. Behind him, the other bikers formed a protective semicircle. They weren't guarding the gas pumps. They were guarding her moment. One of them quietly went into the store and came back with 2 bottles of water and a sandwich, placing them gently on the hood of Elias's car before retreating. For 20 minutes, the gas station was not a place of transit, but a sanctuary. An 80-year-old woman and a Hell's Angel shared a connection that transcended age, appearance, and lifestyle. It was a reminder that beneath the leather vests and the cardigans, beneath the tattoos and the wrinkles, every human heart beats with the same rhythm of longing for connection. When Elias finally ran out of words, she felt lighter, as if a weight she had carried for a millennium had been lifted. She looked at Bear, really looked at him, and smiled. It was a small, fragile smile, but it was real. "Thank you," she whispered. "No, ma'am," Bear replied, standing up and offering her his arm. "Thank you for trusting us with your voice." He walked her to the pump and filled her tank, refusing to let her pay. As she got back into her car, the entire club raised their hands in a silent salute. Not a wave of goodbye, but a gesture of respect. As Elias drove away, watching them shrink in her rearview mirror, the silence in the car felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. She turned on the radio, humming along to the song that played. For the first time in 3 years, the world didn't feel quite so cold. She realized that sometimes salvation doesn't come in a white robe or a shining chariot. Sometimes it arrives on 2 wheels, wearing leather, with a heart big enough to kneel for a stranger.